All right. Ready? 3, 2, 1.
All right. Welcome to the Space Turtle Show, the greatest show in the galaxy. I am one of your hosts, Joey.
And I'm Josh.
And what movie did we do this week?
Oh man, this movie is super relevant, and I chose it because of, things that are going on currently in the international scene. And so that's going to be Come and See, a Russian movie about World War II and the effects that it has on a young, enthusiastic, and patriotic child as he is recruited into the army and goes through the hells of war, I guess.
Yeah, I don't think you could say it any better.
Yeah.
It's just War is Terrible, the movie.
Yes. And what did you think about War is Terrible, the movie?
I thought War is Terrible, the movie was very, very good.
I thought you were about to say terrible.
No.
Terrible in a good way.
Oh yeah, of course. If I were a smarter person, I probably would have said that. But yeah, I loved it. I mean, the cinematography, as far as 1984, 5, ridiculous. It was so good, right?
Mm-hmm.
The performer kid, ridiculous, so good. The direction, ridiculous. The writing, ridiculous. This movie is one of my favorite movies I've ever seen, and it just continues to wow me the more I think about it.
Mm-hmm. I'm not going to beat around the bush either. This is instantly in my life-changing movies.
Yeah.
I honestly expected a very harsh reality of war, but it wasn't all just bashing you in the face with it. There was the hope of the kid. And there are small little changes that I was not expecting that, if it had been exactly how I expected, that would have been life-changing. But the changes or the differences in my expectations that were presented on screen made it instantly life-changing. Like, as it was going on, I was like, wow, how can you do it any better? Because it gave that little innocence and romantic side of the kid before everything starts. And I also had an expectation of a very desolate ending. And although it is pretty desolate, like 99%, I'm not gonna lie, but starting to get his spoilers exactly right now.
Yeah.
He didn't shoot at the baby Hitler. And I think that really turned on its head what I expected, because it almost showed this bit of triumphant humanity of war, and I really thought it would be more like an Apocalypse Now type, although I haven't seen the movie, but
Yeah, I'm biding my time. That's going to be on the show.
Yeah, he's been trying to show it to me for a while now. We just got to get the right time.
My favorite war movie. But, yeah.
Well, I haven't seen Apocalypse Now, but Come and See is my favorite war movie now, so we'll see how it holds up.
Come and See is definitely up there. You could say it's better than Apocalypse Now, and I would not disagree with you, and I would definitely think about it too, because it's just that good. And, going right into the ending, it was such a great turn on its head, and also, it said such a great message, and because you can really see the rage as he's going back, I wish I could go back in time and destroy everything and everything and everything.
Yeah.
And then you go back and he sees him as a child, and then without saying anything, the director conveys everything you need to know, that Hitler was not, he was an absolutely atrocious person, but he was not the root of the problem.
Mm-hmm.
He was just a kid like everyone else, like that kid who was going through war at the time, and he got fucked up somewhere along the way. And obviously, that's the message that you should be taking about this movie. If you're going to take a message about war and the strengths and weaknesses, all the weaknesses, just the weaknesses of war and conflict, is that systemically and on such a grand scale, that war in and of itself creates monsters that then create war.
Damn. Alright, I was about to say that. God damn it. No, I'm just kidding. I was about to say it, but But yeah, I think that solidified that statement even more for me than like a desolate ending would, you know?
Yes.
It was almost like a depiction of monsters would have hit me really hard, but it's a depiction of the creation of monsters, I guess. That was really hard hitting. And I think that the movie also has like a very expert way of visually telling the story as in conjunction with narratively, you know? There was a lot of, like, for example, that ending scene where he's shooting at the picture and it just reverses these things that were happening. That was so much more impactful to me as like a visual presentation than it would be as like someone like talking about it, or even like atrocities that were happening, you know? It really encapsulated this helplessness that you feel as like an individual in war. And although war can turn people into horrible people, and but the group is what makes the biggest monsters, you know? And so one shot from any person wouldn't have turned back the tide. I mean, yeah, of course, if you have shot Hitler, I guess maybe debatable, but the fact is that like he as one soldier is not going to turn back the entire tide of the war. And I think that that's something that's super depressing about war. Like, you have this patriarchy, patriotism.
Yeah. I mean, patriarchy to an extent.
Yeah. But this patriotism that he demonstrates in the beginning, and throughout, as if one person could change that type of stuff, and then in the end it's like the death of that realization, you know, and the helplessness that one person feels. No matter how hard one person fights, they're not going to be able to change the tide of the war. It's a collective that has to do that, you know. And I don't know, I guess that makes me feel very against war, but at the same time it's like, you know, the people who fight in war, that they believe in something, that doesn't make me hate those people either, you know?
Yeah, it did a good job of... I expected it to be a little bit of both sides are terrible, and it was that, but it was most certainly an anti-Nazi Germany.
Oh, yeah.
As it should have been. You know, but it did a good job of portraying that, as well as, like, I think it did a great job of showing in the character's head and with the music and the visuals and everything how badly he wanted to change everything, and then the knowledge that he could not do that kind of crushing defeat and that kind of hopelessness and despair and terror, you know, that was all handled so brilliantly at the end of the film. So, like, it does end on a bad note, but, like, not as bad as it, like, like, I know both of us probably in the back of our head were thinking, he's probably, like, got a good chance of dying.
Yeah.
But they didn't do that, and I think them keeping him alive and him looking at the horrors that he's been a part of and then he's done is way stronger of a message.
Yeah. I think that emulates, I mean, obviously this movie came first, but it kind of emulates the Dunkirk effect, but like the survivalistic journey or mentality of war. And I think this one balances it even more so with the patriot... Fuck, I keep saying patriarchy.
Nationalism?
Yeah, nationalism, and just emotional that Dunkirk kind of left out. And obviously, in my opinion, I enjoy some of the emotionless aspect of Dunkirk, because it kind of displays this type of survive at all costs type war. But this one I felt like is more impactful because it has that emotion, but yet this guy's just trying to survive like 99% of the time. Like, he's so... In Dunkirk, he's kind of like, about everything. It's just like trying to survive. But this one, he's trying to survive, and he also has hope. And then watching that hope change him and affect him. And I think one of my favorite parts is when they gathered all those, I guess, like betrayers or like German people that were helping the Germans after they burned like the everyone in the barn or whatever like that.
Yeah.
And the dichotomy between some of them that are like, you know, I'm just a normal person, I'm old, I'm sick, I don't do anything, and then the other person that's like, your race needs to be eradicated because you're inferior to everyone, you know? That comparison between the two. And there are some that, you know, don't have as powerful emotions as others, and yet the coldness of a bullet, you know, that it doesn't discriminate. And the same thing with the fighter, I guess, with the women and children, you know.
Absolutely. And just before we go into the gruesomeness of the barn, which I'm sure we will get into because that was such a terrifying and horrific scene, but never mind, let's go into it because I forgot what I was going to say anyway.
Like, warnings for real.
Wait. Okay, I remembered. So, just before that, I think the best war material and the best stories about war, the main characters they always understand how terrible this is and how awful the situation is. Like, even with some very well made movies, Saving Private Ryan, for example, the desolation and the horror, just something about it. It's there, but it's not like, it's not the same way. It's a little bit more cookie cutter.
Yeah, no, for real.
But movies like this and movies like Apocalypse Now, again, characters that understand, or even books I've read, like, you know, the Hemingway book, whatever it's called.
Sun Also Rises?
No, not that one. The other one. But anyway, if you know Hemingway, you know what I'm talking about. But, you know, concepts like that, you have to understand if you're going to make something about war. You just have to understand that it's terrible and brutal and awful, and anyone who partakes in it is going to get fucked up.
Yeah.
If films that like try to portray it as like kind of a glossy thing, like we're gonna stay strong, or like something like Hacksaw Ridge, a very good movie, I feel like it doesn't take the right approach quite to war either.
I feel the
Stuff
same
like
way.
that. Yeah, that's all I thought about that. But then, you know, how did you feel about, you know, the barn scene, everything going on in the German village, basically the third act of the film?
I honestly, for some reason, wasn't expecting it. Like, I really felt like there would be some sort of emotional release in some way, you know, like you were saying earlier, like an almost balance between the two. I was not expecting such an anti-Nazi like film, although that is definitely warranted, you know?
Yeah.
But yeah, I guess I went into this film feeling a little bit more about how it's going to portray war in the sense that war is the full enemy. And I really like that it portrays people in war that are the full enemy. And the actions of those callous Nazi like higher ups was just snapped me like out of this type of understanding for everyone, you know? And I think that that's one of the most important things that this film did to me, and that's like the life-changing part, is that, you know, I kind of try to empathize with everyone, but there are things that are just insanely evil. And as I was watching this movie, I thought, I mean, I'm a little bit like, I get caught up in like when I'm watching things, so sometimes I forget like other things. But at the moment, I felt like there was no more truly evil depiction of people that I've ever seen in my life, you know? As I watched the people tell everyone that if you left your children, that you can survive, I felt like that is pure evil. I've never seen something like that in film. And obviously this is a day after we watched it, so maybe I'll like change a little bit, but the impact is still there, you know? Man. And I really like that because I really like the timing we watched this movie too, because I feel like it's been a long time since those things happened, and I watch like a lot of Nazi movies. You know, there's so many, and yet every single time I'm like, okay, yeah, everyone's like, to reference like a Nathan For You episode, you know?
Very appropriate.
The rabbi's like, there are people who deny it, there are people who forget. Like,
oh
you know,
yeah,
like,
of course I didn't think it was going to be relevant.
Setting up shop in a store, that's really where you need to get reminded. But
of course, for people who don't know, you know, that's the episode where he puts a bunch of a Holocaust memorial in a retail store.
Yeah, but in while watching that episode, I'm like, what are you talking about? Like, yeah, of course. But like while watching this movie, I was like, oh my gosh, I needed to be confronted with what happened in these things. Like, I know what happened, like 6 million Jews or things like that, but watching it like was a different experience to me, you know.
Absolutely, and I think one thing that he did very well in the film is they were constantly one-upping themselves on how badly this was gonna go. Like, they would do something and I'd be like, all right, this is terrible, but that's pretty bad. You know, they're not gonna get much worse than this, and then they get worse than that. You know, they're like, we're gonna round them all up and throw them in a barn, and I'm like, well, fuck, that's awful. They're just gonna like take all these people, take them away from their homes, you know, and they're like, you know, we'll let you leave if you leave your children, which is so terrible. Like, it's hard to fathom how terrible that is and what kind of mindset you have to do that. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, they gruesomely burn everyone, and they do not mince images when we're talking about something like that. They burn it well, first of all, they shoot them all, and then they burn them.
And there's just people just screaming still, like, after they've done shooting. And sometimes I just love the shots. Honestly, I'm like feeling like bad about saying I love anything about this movie because it just makes me feel like, oh man, this is such a good shot. It frames everyone so well as they're shooting everyone else, and I'm like, I'm not sure if I should say that out loud. You know?
I know what you mean. Like,
yeah.
It's hard to be like, you know, we're talking about how the quality of a movie, but you know, this is like a real life occurrence, and this is certainly an event that happened in reality. Yeah,
and it calls back because when he first joins the resistance, they take a picture, you know, they're like, hey, come on everybody, hey, you know, like, Captain, let's go, and they take like a little picture, and he's like, and then that shot is reiterated whenever they're about to shoot everyone in the barn. It like pulls back and you see all of these people with their guns pointed, and then boom, like, oh man, and then screaming just doesn't stop because obviously there's some people still alive.
I can still hear it in my
head,
you know.
And it's just not like, you know, they throw a couple Molotov?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, and it's like, okay, there's a little fire. And we're like, okay, maybe some of that's around. And then they just bomb the shit, and then they just like flamethrower it.
They just keep going.
It's like, oh man, like, damn. And I think that is just reiterating the amount of cruelty that afterwards they just burn all the buildings. Like, for what reason? There's no one in there. And they just, I don't know, they're laughing and they're just driving around.
And let's not forget that they take a woman and they gang rape her in the back of a truck.
Is that not the girl? Or there's some things I couldn't tell, yeah.
I didn't know for sure. I don't think it's the girl, but I think the film was clearly trying to get us to connect her to the girl from before. But I don't know for sure. But I think you know, he's trying to say, like, this could be anyone. For all you know, kid. Like, this is your loved ones. This is, you know, this is that kind of connection. This is somebody's loved one.
Yeah, and they pulled no punches. Like, they just, like, blood, like, down her leg, all the way down. She's, like, messed up in the face. Like, oh my gosh. And I think, I just want to praise the lead actor so much.
Dude.
Like, I think he carries, like, the first half of the film. There's not a lot that really goes on, but the first thing, like, I mean, there's the beginning part where it's kind of, like, romantic and all that kind of stuff, and then they get bombed, and when he goes deaf, that just attached me to his character, like as a leech, like, instantly. He's, like, trying to navigate his life, and then the sound editing that, like, follows that. You're disoriented, he's disoriented, he's moving around, and his, like, delusion, I completely believed, because it didn't make it feel like he was deluding himself. It felt like if I was, I'm in my audience seat, I also felt deluded, you know? There's the flies around when he comes in, he's like, oh, I guess everyone's done, and then they're eating, and then she, like, kind of throws up, like, I totally felt in his shoes, and as they were running away, she turns around, she sees bodies. I can't even tell if they were his family, or if they were just a bunch of people, and she turns around, and he doesn't really look, so I'm like, was it them? Like, it gave me, like, a little hope, and as he's running, he just tries to believe that his family's still alive, you know? And that whole mud scene was just so intense, like, and then she was like, he's deaf, he's crazy or something like that, and then they pick him up, I guess the survivors or something like that, and then they're like, yeah, your family got killed, and he's just walking around, like, barely hearing everybody, so it's like, he barely knows that his family's dead, he's almost, like, looking for them, even though all these people are like, oh, I'm so sorry, like, your family's dead, or whatever.
Yeah.
And that just...
Well, yeah, and you're talking about the sound editing, too, like, when he reaches that crowd of people, and the disorienting part is you never, like, the crowd is just chirping and talking in a way that just starts to be like nails on a chalkboard. You can just tell it's like biting at you, and it did it so well in the way that it created an atmosphere that just, it's just like if a migraine was a scene, it would be that scene, but a migraine paired with your entire family's dead. You know,
migraine.
What a shitty migraine.
Yeah.
But as an audience member, he does so many good things with, like, beyond words. I think that's a huge strength of this movie that I know we've talked about, but I just want to reiterate again, like, what he does beyond words, like, as far as sound, or you're talking visually, everything beyond the script is just elevated tenfold. And not to mention, the script in and of itself is brilliant also.
Yeah.
Like, his performance is enhanced so much by, you know, his story and the character development, and you know, he starts at A and gets all the way to B. You can see by the end of the movie he's just completely different as a character. He is absolutely, he's lost his innocence entirely. He's understood the horrors of the world, and you can just see it all. You can just tell, and his performance just gets better and better as the movie goes on.
Yeah, I feel like I want to reiterate that the writing elevates the visual nature of it, you know? And, like, we praise the visual because that is the in-your-face type stuff, but you need to have a story where the main character doesn't say something, and you know what they're trying to say, you know? Mm-hmm. Like, narratively, you know what they're wanting to say, what is on their heart and what weighs on them, but they can't say it. And so these moments where he doesn't really say anything, where he kind of stares, are, you know, visually impressive and acted in an insane way. But it has to be built up by the writing, you know? It has to be built up by, it has to be shown to the audience what he wants to express, but he can't, you know? And I think that has a lot to do with the script and how the story is written, that these moments where he doesn't know what to say are so powerful, you know?
Yeah, well, and it's like what came first, the chicken or the egg?
Yeah.
It's like the writing versus the directing. They both feed off of each other, and they're both so brilliant that it's hard to be like, oh, the writing elevates the visual aspect, but the visuals elevate the writing,
Yeah.
and the sound elevates both, and they both elevate the sound. And you know, it's just a scenario where everything just works.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, it's hard to say why, because it's just everything.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just everything.
Yeah. Did you want to check the end?
Thank you. I was too into the discussion. I hadn't even looked at it.
So I think we were talking about when a film is perfect, and I mean, I am not seasoned enough with this movie to say that it's perfect, but when a movie is perfect, every aspect elevates the other aspect, you know? I truly believe in the sum of its parts is greater, you know, than the parts themselves.
Absolutely,
you know? Yeah. And I think that this film did it. There is nothing that I disliked. And that is saying something, because, you know, I kind of notice a little of something all the time, you know? Whether it be like acting, sound editing, sometimes I'm a real stickler for a soundtrack that pushes you to have an emotion. You know, we talked about this in the Batman. But I didn't feel that with this film. Lighting was so good. Even the set design, I couldn't believe that this movie was from 1984. Like, there was interesting and innovative shots and shot editing, you know, or like, Tommy said that it was almost like, it felt like David Lynch in a movie, in a war film. Although I kind of disagree, but
yeah.
But it wasn't just like a linear story. It was saturated with like emotion and like, what is it, like the subconscious, you know, of the character.
Yeah, to me, the visuals of the movie, it felt like it had the landscape of Lawrence of Arabia or Bridge on the River Kwai, like a 50s movie, kind of that bright color, Technicolor kind of.
Yeah.
But it had the shot selection of a film from this decade. Like, this decade.
Yes.
Even, you know, a progressive film in this decade.
Yeah.
So that, and I loved that. Seeing that combination, I never thought I would be so happy to see it, you know. I love the look of, you know, those David Lean kind of epics, so to see that appreciated, especially like with the opening scene, I think it was most prevalent, that kind of bright beach sand kind of area, before I knew what I was about to go on.
Oh, yeah.
But I love that visual style.
Mm-hmm. I have a question for you, though. Narratively, this is kind of what I took from it, or I'm like a little confused about it, obviously, but there's the old man at the beginning, right? And he's like telling them not to dig or whatever.
Yeah.
Do you think that their digging showed, like, revealed the town to the invaders? Or was it like just his own guilt that flashback to that old, or like, you know, when he was all burned and stuff like that, he was like, it was you know, it was like, I told you not to do it or whatever. I was like, did their digging like, you know, show where the village is? Or, I mean, that kind of makes a little weird sense, because you could probably see the houses before you saw like stuff in the sand, but.
So yeah, I don't think it was that, because I'm pretty certain that kind of story was he needed a gun to volunteer.
Yeah.
And so he wanted to find a gun. He finds a gun, volunteers, even though the old man tells him not to volunteer. And by volunteering, he leaves his family. He's not able to be there with them. And the man sees the kid's face and he's like, I told you not to do that. Now you understand what the world is, and you were too young to be a part of this, and that's what I got from it. I don't think it was him directly digging those holes leading to the houses. Although
Yeah.
I could I guess understand if it was that, but I think it was mostly like it wasn't literally his fault, but it was like if it had happened to me, I probably would have blamed myself too.
Yeah, I think that that's what I ended up landing on, is that like it's worded in a way that he feels guilt for it. And I mean there is almost like an audience understanding that if he had stayed he would have died too, you know? And I think that this survivor's guilt follows him throughout the film. And I just love that reiteration of the horrors that he doesn't imagine through that old man and then through his mom. And he's like smiling, he's like, you know, I'm about to do this thing, I'm gonna be such a man, you know, I'm gonna do this thing. And she's like, no, you're gonna leave us. And yeah, so the first half of the film is this total like 180 of what it means to be like protective, what it means to like have guilt and all that kind of stuff. And yeah, I think that I agree with you in the end, is that like it isn't really directly his fault, but I think then that it was worded in the way that he took guilt from it. And I think there was a lot of like subtle things that the narrative and the dialogue really honed in on, is that it never truly says that it's his fault or not his fault. No one really ever says it's not your fault, you know, which is interesting.
Yeah.
But no one ever says it is your fault either. And so it's this journey of like blaming yourself and being helpless. And like, damn, like this, especially when he gets out of the barn. I know he doesn't have a kid, but like, even if you don't have a kid, getting out of that barn is insane. Like, I could not imagine what I would do. I couldn't even begin. Like, that is an insane situation. And his acting when he gets out, his like, just stone face, like, it's definitely racked with emotion, but you couldn't really tell what emotion, you know? And I think that his acting is epitomized by that. It's like just shock, really, just unbelief. He almost blocks everything out, and I think that the cinematography in that sense kind of adds to that. There's moments where there's like a blur of like a background around him as he reacts to things, and I loved those scenes, you know? It really felt like a disconnect between him and reality and other people. And I think that's one of the most impactful themes of the movie, is that war creates this type of disconnect between you and other people.
Yeah, and I think it reminds me of a scene from a movie we watched recently, Drive My Car.
Ah.
It reminds me of the scene between the main character and his driver when he tells her, if I were your father, I would tell you that it wasn't your fault, that it wasn't you, that you didn't do this, but I'm not. So you killed your mother and I killed my wife. And I think about that, and you know, what it really means is we can't get rid of this guilt, and it's always going to stick with us. And
yeah.
It's a very similar theme, I think, between this movie and that one, in that you can't directly say that it's not his fault, because he's never going to not believe that. That's always going to stick with him, and that's just the reality. And I think they do a very good job of showing the film that way, and kind of building it around that, because no matter how much someone tells him it's not his fault, it's not going to change how he feels and what he does. And I think it just feels more isolating every time he becomes the only one to survive something, because it happens to him 3 times.
Yeah,
you know,
that's a lot.
One for every act, basically, when he survives them.
Unbelievable.
Yeah. It's a miraculous story, I guess, but when he survives his family's massacre, and then he survives the trip away,
Yeah, the
and
machine guns, the cow.
yeah, all of that, and then he survives the barn. Each time it starts to weigh on him more, that his survival, he feels more and more guilty, and it just does, like, that's just another example of the way this film can build in intervals, and how it does such a good job of creating that kind of tension, whether it's direct or literal or metaphorical or unconscious kind of tension.
Mm-hmm.
It does such a good job of building intervals in every level of the film.
Yeah, and I think to bounce off of what you were saying with the comparison with Drive My Car, I feel like it's not impossible to be told that. It just comes from a specific person, He says, I'm not your father, so I can't tell you that it's not your fault. So I'll tell you that it was your fault, and it was my fault that I killed my wife, And I think that is the biggest tragedy of death, almost. Is that the only person that could tell him that it wasn't his fault is his family, is his mom, and his sisters, But they can't tell. So the only people who will tell or can tell are not going to be people who are going to change your mind, And so you're stuck in this. The people that you want to hear from the most are not there to tell you, to comfort you anymore. And I think that is like such an emulation of war, These people that you want to live up to, you want to protect, you want to show that you're good, that you're strong, etc. Those people are the ones that are not there anymore, and that is the most tragic thing,
Yeah, I think that's a great way of putting it, because even when I was saying the kind of connection, I didn't think about how extra tragic it is that he doesn't have his father to even, or in his case, mother and family.
Mm-hmm.
And just another thing, like the way they subtly create that tension, like you can already tell words like his mother just getting so angry at him for leaving, like, why would you leave us? Like, words like that stick in my mind, so I know it's going to stick in his mind, even though he never says, like, my mother's last words were, are you leaving me? Because I feel like, American films, I always feel like people have to say those things. Like, they always say them, and I'm like, everyone knows that. Like, if it's in my head, I can be sure it's in his head. So it's more beautiful to show it visually and through expression.
Yeah, and I think that goes back to how I said that the writing sets up for other silent scenes. Her cries and that kind of stuff sets up for him to be silent and facing the camera in later scenes, And I also don't think that there was a censorship, almost, not like the actual censorship, but just pulling back on the mother's pleas, When I was first watching it, well, this is the first time, but going through the scene the first time, she started using very, I guess, manipulative or just very last-ditch strategies.
Yeah, I mean, because she couldn't physically do anything.
Yeah.
So she has to try everything she can.
And yet, watching it as you're going through, before you see the rest of the movie, you're like, oh shit, she's like, look, we're all gonna die, you want your sister to die, I'm like, damn, she's really going at it, and the intelligence that it takes to paint that type of plea in the most insane, or I guess insane, or just extreme way, for later on, it's man, she knows what's ahead. And so, if I was in that situation, I would use every manipulative, technique to get my kid to stay. Because, I would force them if I had to, if I could, and she obviously couldn't. But, it's what he couldn't foretell, but she could, you know?
Yeah, and they do such a great job of painting that, because as she's saying that, the kids are laughing and they're playing.
Yeah.
And it was kind of funny at the time to see that, but then, 20 minutes of film time later, it's not so funny anymore.
Yeah.
And, looking back, it's not so funny at all.
Yeah. And I think that line between, like, war and not war, I guess, is so solidified in this movie. He's kind of jolly. He's like looking for a gun. Oh man, this is gonna be fun. I'm gonna prove myself and everything. And then he gets bombed, and that shit just like blips the whole movie. And so in a war, that even if it's getting right to your village or your like city or whatever, I guess it's just not fathomable to imagine that kind of stuff happening to you. And so that depiction in the beginning adds to the flip later on, and I think that added a lot to the film. It's not just like this is just the most horrible war thing that can ever happen. It's like it catches you off guard, just like it does with the main character.
And that depiction is a little childlike, right? You know how it's like, this is like such a happy, like a nice, comfortable place, and it's shown that way. And I think it does a good job of symbolizing, just by the choice of having a very young character. It says something about war in general, and the idea that the common trope with war and what everyone says about war is fought by old men using young boys as cannon fodder.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what people are saying right now about Ukraine, about how like you hear about Russian soldiers starving, young men starving there, or Ukrainians, obviously refugees, and young men are having to fight this war. Mm-hmm. Although I'm thinking mostly about the Russian side, because they're the ones that chose this war, as far as the older men, but younger men are having to fight it. It really puts a perspective in where it's like, these people don't understand what they're about to get into, and the people that do nothing, or they don't change it. Mm-hmm. But that's mostly the case with the instigator. I want to make that clear. Like on the Russian side, it's not. It's showing that it's a young man's game, that old men fight, but it does a good job of showing, like, it's not it's all terrible, so everyone's to blame. It's like some people are to blame more than others, and it's all terrible.
Yeah, and I think that connects with like the Hitler visual that comes at the end. It's these people's ego and pride, that sacrifices so much. And I think connecting it with real life events right now, shifting the discussion to that, it's what Putin wants to gain power in as a Russian nation, and the ability to treat people as like a game, as like resources. It's just so extreme to me. Like I really commit to the idea of the 21st century being like free of war. I feel like that's such a ancient way of doing things, and there's always better ways than to fight each other. But yet there are, when you're listening to the things that Putin's trying to achieve, like he wants Russia to be a lot more difficult to defend. I mean, a lot more difficult to invade. By taking over Ukraine, he shortens like the invasion, the forces that can invade Russia. If he takes over Ukraine, it like minimizes the amount of area a person or a country has to defend. And that it makes logical sense. But it's this like, what does power do to people? And I feel that power makes people forget that other people exist, I guess. And then national or international relations just become like a game of I don't know, like Catan. Or like civilization, you know?
Well, it's like it starts to gain the idea that like people start to believe that some lives are more important than others, and that some lives are worth sacrificing as opposed to others, which is like an idea that has to be executed if you're in the middle of war, but to instigate a war, just from that perspective, you know, the idea of like, you know, Russia taking over Ukraine right now, it's for nothing. It's you're not defending anything. You're just fighting for the sake of power and more power.
Yeah.
There's nothing for you really, and there's nothing to fight for.
Well, I think it's like fear, you know? Like fear is like a very driving factor. Fear of the future, fear of like war in the future. You're trying to gain like more power or more strategical environmental like stuff to prepare for the future, you know? But I think that moving away from the movie a little bit, because I feel like everything is praised because the movie is so good.
Yeah.
It makes me wonder about the price of like power and influence, you know? It makes me think about the United States and the fact that we did a lot of things that were atrocious and power hungry in the beginning, so that now we can sit and be like, yo, it should be peace, you know? You should listen to us because we know the best and peace is always better, you know? And is there like any ability to be pro-peace without power, you know?
Yeah, it's a very hypocritical position for the United States to take, because we are, you know, just as bad as Russia as far as our kind of hand in imperialism and taking over countries.
Yeah.
You know, like we own, like for example, we have a territory right now, Puerto Rico, that we just own them and they can't do anything about it. You know, stuff like that. That's not good, you know? We have a very faulty perspective in our nation. But I don't know.
But I think that, like, what is the ability to be pro-peace without having the voice to influence others to be pro-peace, you know? It's almost like a very holier than thou type perspective that the U.S. has, you know? But because they have so much power, they can be holier than thou. But there's no way that I can be holier than like Russia, you know? I'll be like, hey, can we just be peaceful? Like, who's gonna hear that, you know? Like, who's gonna hear us talking
Yeah, of course.
about being pro-peace right now, you know? And so it almost takes a clean hand type, oh, well, in the past the U.S. took a lot of territories, but I didn't take a lot of territories, but now I have the power to say, oh, we should be pro-peace, you know? And that's just insane to me. And I mean, I'm not looking for an answer or anything like that, obviously, but it just made me really think about that post the movie.
Well, yeah, and there's so many complicated questions of how to handle something going on like this that people are talking about, because we're talking like, you know, economic sanctions against Russia right now that's crippling Russia's economy to some degree, which is much better than war. I think everyone can agree on, but at the same time, everyone's also pointing out that who are these economic sanctions actually hurting? You know, they're certainly hurting the people that aren't going to war in the first place. They're hurting the common person, the people that aren't making the decisions.
Yeah.
So on that level, it's still not doing what we want it to do, but what can we do?
Yeah.
And at the same time, using our economic pull. How did we get our economic pull? We got it from war, from taking over countries. We got oil from the Middle East that we've been bombing. We've got food from South America, which we've been overthrowing, you know. So it's such a complicated and horrific process that, you know, morality is such a difficult mountain to climb. It's almost like we just don't deserve the power that we have, and until we secede that power, then our voice is untruthful.
Yeah, I think that leads into like the people that lead, you know, and the fact that the ending of this film really hammers home, you know. Obviously, it wasn't Hitler who made people feel a certain way. Obviously, he capitalized on it, but he didn't make them feel a certain way, you know. And yet, at the end of it, he doesn't choose to shoot the kid, even though he watched all these atrocities. And I feel like that hopeful note kind of like answers, although, you know, there's no real answer, but answers that, like, that irrevocable, unanswerable moral question, you know? Like, what can you do? And I think that this film presents that question to you with, like, bright colors, with, like, bold letters, you know? And I think what can you do is you just, I mean, the easy answer is don't kill children. But, like,
Yeah.
but, like, you try to be as moral as you possibly can. And you fight for what you think is the moral way to do things. And even then, I feel like that's somewhat of a cop-out, you know. Sometimes, like, people fight for what they think is morally right, but some people may think, I don't know, that gay people shouldn't exist, and that's like a moral thing that they're fighting for, you know. So the question is still ambiguous, but I think from this movie, then you can't identify with the Nazis, and there isn't this double relatability, because you can see how evil it is for these people to enjoy women and children being killed, you know. And so in the end, he doesn't enjoy, he doesn't relish, he doesn't even kill baby Hitler, you know? And so he runs into the group and he fights on with the moral standings that he has as a person.
Yeah, well, and I think more than I don't think it's necessarily saying fight for, you know, whatever morals you see fit, although it's implied. I think a lot of it is just like have mercy, you know, is this overarching like kind of moral message is like,
I can agree with that.
You know, in all aspects of what you're doing, have mercy, and have the mercy that you were not given. And to do what you can as far as that goes. And to loop around how the film deals with it in our conversation earlier is that it does such a good job of displaying the hopelessness of that answer as well, and how unsatisfying that answer really is. Because that's all we can do as an individual, and understanding that us as an individual is not going to make, we can't fix everything. The only thing we can do is control ourselves and control what we can do for us and the people around us.
Yeah, I think that's one of the biggest paradoxes, I guess, in life, is that, like, you can't do anything, But if you think you can't do anything, then nothing's gonna happen. But if you do think you can do something, then if enough people think that they can do something, then something's gonna happen. But you can't do anything by yourself. Like, that's so wild. And the movie really wrestles with that. And it doesn't provide a cookie cutter answer. And I think that that's what I respected a lot about the movie.
We totally went over time.
Shit.
Oh, yes!
So, going off of that, talking about all these things, I was just wondering, what are your ending thoughts? Like, do you have any last kind of ideas or things you wanted to talk about, and, conclusion, if you have one?
Yeah, I think that I need to respect old films less.
What the fuck? That's what you got out of it? No! That's the last thing I wanted to hear.
Because this film did so much in 1984 that I feel that, like, other ones are not trying hard enough. Try harder.
I'll show you some better ones, I swear. I've got better.
But yeah, you have this, you have, what was the George Orwell one? Fucking...
Animal Farm?
Oh, what the fuck? Not George Orwell.
Oh, THX?
Wait, that was George Orwell?
No.
Um,
It was Orwellian-ish.
Oh, yeah. But, I don't know. I don't know what reference I was trying to make.
1984?
That's dumb. I guess that wasn't a very, like, good reference to make. But anyways, I think my point is that I am not exactly dissing old films. I just feel like I am more of, like, a very visual and experimental type person. And so, watching this film made me realize that you could do these types of stuff back then. And this one did it so well, honestly. I did not, for a second, even though I knew, felt like this movie was from 1984. It felt like early 2000s, like at the very oldest, And so for my personal preference, I feel that visually, stories can be told at all times, There's before we were talking about how, or I was describing how old films felt like a mastery of one type of artistic tool, I compared it to back in the olden days when people only had a pencil and they would make like the best pencil painting or drawing or whatever that they could. But nowadays you can use anything. You could use like a piece of plywood and put it in your painting and be like, this is art, And so in that sense, although I do still respect very singular type perfect mastery of certain films, this one showed me that there is mastery in the entirety of a filmmaking process, even back then, And obviously it's not the first time I realized that. I hope everyone knows that. But it reiterated it very strongly.
No, and I do know what you mean, because especially in America, and especially with our Hollywood filmmaking process, and especially with our politics in the early 20th century, how important capitalism was to us, and how we must abide to the Henry Ford kind of factory process of making films. A lot of films came out cookie cutter and they're very conventional. So I really can understand a person not latching onto those, because it makes sense. I will show you some sometime. I really think you'll get way into Stanley Kubrick. I want to show you Clockwork Orange.
Oh, I definitely need to watch more Stanley Kubrick.
Surprisingly. He's such a great filmmaker. And I do think you'll like Apocalypse Now, because it's very similar to this movie, except it's basically like if the kid grew up and now he's got to do it again.
Yeah. Oh man, I'm excited for that.
But I know what you mean, because this film was so much before its time, as far as its filmmaking capabilities and its progressive nature, and I just could not speak higher of the ending product, and you know, from everything, it all just came together, like we were saying. It didn't have a dull moment. Just some things we didn't say that I just want to give a quick shout out to. You know, the lead actress that was with them for the entire first act, she was phenomenal. She was incredible. You know, I just wanted to mention that a lot of European countries are trying to take away Russian artwork right now because of the crisis in Russia.
Yeah.
And how I want to mention that is not a good idea, because not all Russians think the same. You know, I want to copy the link to this movie in that email. Because clearly not all Russians think the same, because this was a product of the Soviet Union before the Soviet Union even came down.
Yeah.
So, you know, guys, don't do that.
Yeah, and even the war right now is not like a product of the Russian people. It's a product of like Putin and like the people in power, you know. So.
Yeah.
I mean,
absolutely.
what can you do, really? You can't cripple Putin without hurting the people that don't believe in him either. It's just large moral questions.
It's a very sad situation. And this movie does such a good job of encapsulating that.
I think that we should title this episode "War is Bad?"
So what's this about a war thing?
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. That would be a good title. Speaking of that, what a terrible transition. I'm just gonna talk about the next movie we're gonna do. So I'm gonna talk about it while I'm pulling up the title, because I may or may not have forgotten it. But so my film is next week, and it's gonna be my last film of this season. And I wanted to do something on a film industry that is forgotten in the eyes of the international film kind of scenery area, community, and that is Nigeria, Nollywood. They have the second largest film industry as far as films made, and neither of us have seen any of them. You know?
Yeah, I think that like the way that movies are made that you're not privy to is so interesting, even if those movies might be, you know, different than the movies we're regularly experiencing. And I think that's going to be a great change of pace, because we went from Santa Tango to Come and See, and I'm feeling a little emotionally drained. I don't know about you guys and everything going on with the world, and so, you know, it'll be great to find a movie or be shown a movie that we can have a little bit of fun in, and, you know, critique in healthy ways, but also experience something new.
Yeah, and this next movie isn't going to be, it's going to be a comedy. It's going to be like it's going to be a lighthearted one. We've done a lot of serious movies, a lot of emotionally draining movies, so this is going to be kind of a great palate cleanser, and a good chance to. I can't find the fucking name of the movie.
I gave you so much time.
I know.
I was doing so well.
I don't remember the name, and it's hard to look for the movie.
What are you searching up?
I'm looking
Nollywood films top 10 lists.
Exactly. That's exactly what I'm doing, and I'm running out of words to say. I have to look up the list, and like it's a legit.
Okay, I can give you more time.
Yeah.
Things I wanted to praise more that we didn't get to in Come and See. Makeup department.
Oh, that was like so good.
I know that, oh man, there's a lot to discuss about the, honestly, trauma that the main actor received in order to shoot this film. There's a lot of things that honestly we didn't have time to discuss. You know, is there potential animal cruelty in this movie? Is there potential human cruelty in this movie? I've read that.
Get to those,
that his hair actually turned white because of all the stress that he went through. Does that make the film better? Is it necessary? I don't know. Maybe we gotta watch it a second time and then we can talk about that. But the makeup department, at the very least, enhanced all of that. Because there's no way he literally aged like. If he did, that is insane and also horrible.
Yeah, that's horrible.
Yeah.
He literally looked almost like an old man by the end of it with all those wrinkles.
His like under eye bags were like dry and like, oh man, it looked so painful. The makeup department and I think the set design was insane as well. The amount of fog that either they had to wait until there was fog or they had to like pump it or whatever, but they convincingly made everything look like it was part of the times, in like the 1940s or something like that. As well as like super horrific in the way that they designed the houses, the interiors, the corpses, the dead cow, you know, like all that kind of stuff was insane. And you know, if I had more time, I would praise every aspect of this film because there's not a single one that I thought was bad. But I wanted to highlight makeup and set design before we finished.
Absolutely, and thank you for saying that, making such a glorious amount of stall, such a good addition, as well as stalling. It was a great double. So I found the name of the movie. It was hard to look up because it's like a Nigerian name, so I didn't remember it. But
yeah, of course.
Osufia in London, and I don't know if I'm saying that right. I'll have the right pronunciation next week because, you know, well, I've watched it, but it's called Osufia in London, and I could not find much about the best Nollywood movies. There's not a lot out there as far as English Google is concerned. But this movie, someone said, like, if, you know, it's made by Kingsley Ogoro, and it's a good chance to see one of his movies. And I was like, all right, maybe an auteur. Like, okay, that's the best I've got. Let's do this one, and it should be fun, and I'm excited about it. And
it'll be great to praise someone who is an auteur in a realm that we don't know. At the very least, we can have fun discussing a movie that isn't as serious. So
absolutely. So, you know, if you like that, subscribe, like. Appreciate all the love of the Drive My Car, you know, video.
Yeah.
First time.
Comment? A dislike?
Yeah, we got a dislike, man. We finally
we're so excited. Oh.
You know, this is great. So appreciate it. It's nice to know that, you know, I feel like at least one person is gonna watch this. Maybe not this part, not at the very end, but someone is at least for sure going to watch this.
You know who that is? It's going to be Joey Garvey.
Yes, it's going to be me. I have to watch him over. But, you know, whatever.
That's going to be the season finale for Joey, and then stay tuned for the next episode for my last pick of season 2. So,
all right.
Which I haven't decided yet, so maybe some suggestions? I don't know.
Audience pick? No. Not for you, Josh. I'm sorry. Yeah, take away Josh's final movie.
But, all right, bye.